Welcome back to the podcast. Happy Mercury retrograde. We're about halfway through it now, about a week and a half in, about a week and a half to go. How's it treating you? Mercury retrograde brings up our shadow, brings up our unconscious patterns, whether we want that to happen or not. It brings it in front of us like shoving a mirror in our face. Which brought to mind the idea of trauma responses and our unconscious patterns related to trauma responses, which is what we're going to talk about today. Please check the show notes for content and trigger warnings. I am your host, Naomi, and this is Mosaic in Progress. So, one of the problems that comes with long-term trauma, when we're talking about the sympathetic nervous system and fight or flight response, which, as more research has been done, we know it's more than fight or flight. There's also a freeze response. There's also a fawn response. But the sympathetic nervous system is the part of your nervous system that takes over when you are in danger or when you perceive you are in danger. And it is the part of you that is designed to keep you safe, which is important from a biological standpoint because you need to be able to neurologically switch gears. I'm fine, I'm happy, I'm safe, I'm home, everything's normal, everything's good, I am relaxed. But a bear just came up into my yard, so now all of that is out the window. You need to be able to go from I'm chill to I need to use all of my energy efficiently to be able to survive this danger. And that is what the sympathetic nervous system does. It helps you survive danger. It conserves energy where energy doesn't need to go, and it directs all of the energy into being able to survive, whether that is you running away from the threat or fighting the threat or staying very, very still and quiet and hiding from the threat. And the freeze and fawn response, while extremely valid, I think it needs to be taken note that those are not default responses. Those are rooted in trauma. They are developed. They are not a biologically default response. They come as a result of trauma. The default response for most trauma survivors, long-term trauma survivors, is freeze or fawn. Because while most people survive a danger, a threat, by escaping it or fighting it, when you are exposed to long-term trauma, such as in an abusive relationship or childhood abuse, your default becomes either get very quiet, small, and still, or pacify out of necessity. These are not default responses that we find in nature. They are only responses that come as a result of prolonged trauma. That doesn't mean there's something wrong with you if that's your default response. It means that you are adaptable and you learn to survive. You shouldn't feel guilty for that or bad for that or like there's something wrong with you. if this is your default response, that means that you're a survivor. My default trauma response now is freeze. And as much as I believe everything that I just said, I hate it about myself. Because when I'm scared, I can't move. Literally. When my trauma response is triggered really badly, I will lay in my bed or on the couch for days. I will only move as it is absolutely biologically necessary or necessary for my survival. I completely check out of everything around me. I don't like that about myself. I wish I could change that about myself. I wish my response was adaptive to whatever the threat was. But this is what I learned to survive. And if I am to heal any of it, I have to forgive that about myself. I have to learn to love that about myself. Because I spent 27 years living with a man who was unsafe. He beat me, he raped me, he manipulated me, he indoctrinated me, he financially abused me, he verbally and emotionally abused me. He is a master gaslighter. His wife, my mother, was his star flying monkey. If you're not familiar with the term flying monkey, it is a term used to describe the people who narcissists use to elevate themselves, to promote their cause, to further abuse their victims. Flying monkeys are manipulated themselves, but they are on the side of the narcissist against the abused person. I couldn't escape. I was so financially abused by him that I had no means of escape until I was 27 years old. And for the last 4 years of that, the emotional abuse became even worse. The physical abuse stopped when I was about 19, was the last time that it happened. But it was unnecessary after that because he had done it for so much of my life. He didn't need to anymore. He knew all he had to do was threaten me. Because I couldn't escape, my most desired response when I sense danger is to run, because I had no means of doing so prior to that. And I am not alone in this. It is something that is very common in people who are trapped in abusive situations, that their first instinct is to run. Because when you couldn't get away before, and now you can, running means you have control. And control is a really good feeling when you've never had it before. It's hard to overcome that when it's not the best strategy. Because while my default response when I'm triggered is to freeze, when I'm not triggered and I just sense danger, my default is to run. Couldn't run before, I will run now. I'm not going to give it the opportunity to trap me and hold me forever. I'm going to get out before it's too late. And this has been a pattern for me in my friendships, in my relationships, in my jobs, in hobbies, in anything. My default is to run away because I never had that option before. And it is intoxicating to finally be able to run when you couldn't before. It's hard to override that and allow yourself to understand that not everyone is your abuser. As I have gone through therapy, as I have done my shadow work, and I don't think anyone is ever really fully done with their shadow work till they're dead. It's an ongoing process. I have learned about myself that my default is to run, and I have come to understand why my default is to run. Not everyone has that same default. Some people have the default to fawn. I'm going to fawn all over the threat. I'm going to make them happy, and then they won't hurt me. And of course, fighting the person, running away, those are very common ones. Freezing. And freezing doesn't just look like staying in one place for most people. Sometimes freezing looks like an inability to make a decision. Sometimes freezing looks like a stagnated life. And I say this because it's important to see this in the people that you love and see this in yourself. Because sometimes we judge ourselves or the people around us much too harshly when they are not bad people. We are not bad people. What we are is traumatized people who need understanding, who need help. And understanding that about yourself helps you understand that about other people. And even if you are not a person who has been through a long-term trauma, it's important to understand that there are people who have been. Not everyone in my life knows that I have been through the horrific things that I have been through. It's not necessary for them to know it. But most people who don't know it don't understand why I behave the way that I do. And this doesn't mean that you owe everyone an explanation for everything you've been through. You don't. You absolutely don't. Not everyone needs to know your entire life story. But if you're a person who hasn't been through this, who has not suffered trauma, it is important to understand that there are people around you who have. And it is becoming more and more common for people who have been traumatized as children, who have been sexually abused, who have been in abusive relationships, to be our next door neighbor, our coworker, our best friend. They are not in the minority anymore. And I was having a conversation in a wonderful group on Facebook that is dedicated to women's healing from patriarchal culture. And a discussion arose in the group about men and men providing for their wives and families, and how men actually provide themselves wives and families. And without getting into the details of the discussion, I made the comment that our society is extreme. They were discussing incels and the extremist viewpoints that they have, and how maybe it isn't so extreme in our society. And I said, I think it is an extremist viewpoint, absolutely. However, it's not extreme in our society because our society is extreme. We are a society that has normalized abuse. We're a society that has normalized misogyny, racism, sexism, child abuse, rape, sexual abuse of all kinds, including spousal abuse, spousal rape. It's normal in our society. We accept it. We don't speak of it in those terms. But it is a thing that has become normalized. It's a thing we've accepted. And anyone who challenges it is negatively labeled as woke or liberal, or I won't get into all of the slurs that are hurled at people who just want to bring attention to the fact that we have marginalized the majority of our society, the majority of the world, and are treating them as second-class citizens. But it's what has become normal in our society. If you are not straight, white, cis male, your opinion, your feelings, your thoughts, your life does not matter. And let me further qualify with that, with if you are not in the middle to upper class of society, you don't matter. That is the society that we live in, whether people want to admit it or not. And I hear so much because I work, unfortunately, in an environment now with very right-wing, misogynistic mindset as the norm. And I hear constantly from my coworkers about how you can't say this anymore and you can't say that anymore, and everyone's so woke now. And there's absolutely no self-reflection. There's no reflection on whether or not what they're saying is accurate or true. It's just how they're feeling, and they don't like the fact that they can't trample all over everyone anymore. And they don't see it that way. And I say this because so many of them, I do not think are bad people. I do not think they are unkind people. I think they are people who will not examine themselves. And that is a dangerous person. If you refuse to examine yourself, no matter what your beliefs are, politically, religiously, or otherwise, if you won't look at yourself, if you won't compare yourself to an opposite viewpoint and measure it against something objective, if you have no standard by which to measure your actions, your thoughts, your beliefs, that is not a standard you have developed yourself, a standard you have curated for yourself, you are a dangerous person. Because anyone who can't be checked can't be reached. For a long time, I was a dangerous person. I don't like to admit that. I don't like to think about that time of my life. But it is fact. It is the reality of the situation. I believed with absolute certainty that I knew what right was, that I knew what truth was, and no one could persuade me otherwise. I had a false perception of myself that I examined the truth outside of my own belief system. But the reality is that I didn't. The reality is that I was so indoctrinated into the belief system that I had, that I was so brainwashed and so steeped in it, I couldn't even see that my, quote, checking of myself wasn't even that. All I did was bolster my own beliefs. I only sought sources that would further validate my belief system. And I think a lot of people do that without realizing it. I think it is a very common thing for people to seek out sources that validate them in whatever their belief system is. It is a terrifying thing to change your belief system, to leave the belief system that you've become comfortable with. And I think this is why so many people don't really check themselves. Leaving the church was the hardest thing that I ever did. And a lot of people think it was easy for me. Most of the people in the church think that I did it because I just wanted to be a whore. That had nothing to do with it. I remember so vividly the day that I couldn't go to church. And I say that because I couldn't bring myself to do it. Everything in my soul was screaming out, "This is wrong. You can't go back there." And I stood in the middle of my room crying, sobbing to God, not even knowing who God was anymore. And I knew that I would never go back that day. I knew it wasn't just, not this week. I knew I was leaving. I was walking away forever. And I in the middle of my sobs, looked up at the sky and just said, "You know my heart. If you're who I have always believed, then you know my heart. You know what is going on. You know what I believe. And you know what I'm going through. And you know that I am doing this, believing it is the right thing and with a clear conscience. And I hope that if you are who I've always believed, that you will be merciful and you will understand that." But I no longer believe you're who I've always believed you are. And I hope I can find who you really are eventually. I didn't know how much my parents were keeping tabs on me at that point, because they were pretty stalkery, if I can use that. And for months, I was terrified. But I had an advantage that a lot of people don't have when they go through this journey, this crisis, this change of faith. 2 weeks after I made that decision, the COVID shutdown happened and churches were closed. So no one knew I wasn't going to church because nobody else was either. And it was over 6 months before anyone from my church reached out to me to ask how I was. And it was when they had reopened and I wasn't there. And they had been reopened for a few months. It took 6 months for anyone to reach out to me. And I think that in and of itself was kind of a confirmation for me that the church wasn't what it said it was. Because the church that I went to, I always felt like I was family. I always felt, I belonged and these people accepted me and they loved me. And being a nurse, working ICU and ER and rapid response all during the pandemic, which they knew. They all knew about it. They knew what my job was. No one asked if I was okay. No one. I went through the most horrific time of my entire career, and no one reached out. What does this have to do with trauma response? Not a lot. But I fought with myself for a long time over if I was running away from the church as a trauma response. If I was running away because I found it triggering. If I sensed danger there that wasn't really there. Because several people had accused me, before it ever happened, that I was going to leave the church because of my father's abuse. Because my father excused all of his abuse with the Bible. He was a master manipulator and scripture twister, and he made excuses for every single thing that he ever did to me with the Bible. this is what God wanted him to do. This was his God-given responsibility. And he could quote chapter verse all day long. He could quote almost the entire Bible. And he was manipulative enough that he could make you feel like you didn't know anything about the Bible or knew so much less than him in any discussion with him about right and wrong. And I had several people accuse me of leaving the church because of my father's abuse. Before I had even left the church, they told me they thought that that's what I was going to do. And I guess it became a self-fulfilling prophecy because I heard it so much. It eventually happened. But I didn't leave because of my father's abuse. I did, but I didn't. I started examining my beliefs because of my father's abuse. I knew that he had lied to me, and I wanted to find out what the truth was, what God really said, what the Bible really said. And as I started examining things critically, it became so much more than just the Bible doesn't say that you should abuse your children. It became the Bible really isn't the unquestionable, infallible word of God. And at that point, I couldn't stay in the church. But I struggled for a long time wondering if I had ran when I shouldn't run. Because I run a lot when maybe it's not the best option. Maybe you should stay and fight. Maybe you should work things out. And this was a problem that manifested in the first healthy relationship that I was ever in. And it was compounded because I was the first healthy relationship he was ever in. He had severe relational trauma, not from his parents, from his past relationships. And the two of us coming together, not knowing how to have a healthy relationship because we'd never done it before, and me just wanting to run definitely didn't help. Because anytime there was conflict, I was ready to pack my bags. And he is a much more patient person than I. And it became very weird for me in a good way, but a confusing way, to see someone not want me to leave. Because every relationship I had ever been in, when things got bad, I was on my way out the door and they were just standing there going, deuces. No one ever tried to stop me. And it's a really hard thing to fight that automatic response that you have, that default that you fall into with trying to run away because you never could, or whatever your particular default is. It's hard to fight it because it's default for a reason. It's a good one. It's a safe one. It helped you survive. Just like freezing helped me survive for my entire childhood, running helped me survive in my adulthood. And being able to adapt your responses to danger is an incredibly important and useful skill that is extremely hard to develop because you only develop it as you keep being exposed to danger. I will forever be grateful that I did not run from that healthy relationship. Because if I had, I would have continued the pattern of running. And that's exhausting. There are people who run for fun. I will never understand those people. If you're a runner, props to you. My older sister ran for a while. She got addicted to it a little bit. People talk about being addicted to running. I'm like, oh, that's nice. I'm addicted to donuts. So running kind of doesn't work well for me. I'm saying this tongue in cheek. But running, physical running, is not something that I enjoy. It's not something I've ever enjoyed. I've never understood the addiction that comes from it. I mean, I understand it logically, rationally, from a biological sense, but it's not something that I ever have understood from a personal level. However, running metaphorically, I'm better at that than anyone I know. But there comes a point where your default no longer serves you, and that goes back to that healthy relationship. Because when you find someone who's willing to work through problems, running doesn't serve it. This is not just about relationships. It's about anything that potentially has a trauma trigger or a sense of danger involved with it. If you don't give it the chance to become something good, then you're always running away from the good thing. I came very close to running away from the good thing more times than I can count. And I was very fortunate in having a very patient man who did everything he could to work through his own demons, his own default response. It's hard to work through trauma. It's hard to change your responses. It's difficult to find something healthy or to be something healthy after being conditioned to be the opposite. But it's worth it. It's worth it to push through. It's worth it to fight your demons. It is worth it to face your shadow. It is worth it to look in the mirror. Because if you don't, you spend the rest of your life as a product of abuse. And I don't know a single person who has been abused who wants to be just another statistic. Just another, yep, I mean, she's that way, he's that way because, of what they went through. You don't have to stay as what they wanted you to be. That is your power. That is your magic. Is that you don't have to be what they wanted you to be. You can be fully in your power. You can be fully yourself. You can be fully whatever you decide to be. You don't have to wear the mask anymore. You don't have to play a role anymore. You don't have to put on a costume every day anymore. You can be your genuine, authentic self. Exactly as you want to be. My first therapist, who what is going to be sainted and put on a throne and crowned and whatever in every single religion after she dies for everything that she did for me. She told me one time, very early in our sessions, you can be whatever you want to be. It was never something that I heard as a child, so it was a little weird to hear it in my mid-20s. And I kind of sat with that for a while. Because I was told you grow up, you get married, you have kids, you become someone's wife, and then you become a mother. And that's what you do because that's what God wants you to do. And I didn't understand you can be anything you want to be. So I sat with it for a very long time. And I came back to her a few weeks later and I said, I thought about what she told me. You can be anything you want to be. Doesn't mean you can be an astronaut or a brain surgeon. Because people tell that to everyone, and not everyone's capable of that. You can be anything you want to be. Means you can be kind. You can be patient. You can be loving. You can be mean. You can be strong. You can be a fighter. You can be whatever you want to be. Whatever you decide you want to be, whoever you decide to be, you can be that. Because you make the decision of who you are. And as hard as it is to change, and as much work as it takes, you also make the decision of how you respond. It's not something that happens immediately. It's not something you can change in an instant. But if you're someone who has been through trauma, long-term trauma, and your trigger response or your default response to danger is something that's not serving you, can you change it? Can you fight the flea? I have been fighting the flea for coming up on 3 years now. And it is rivaling leaving the church as one of the hardest things I've ever done. But my entire life is different because of it. I am different because of it. I am more stable because of it. And it wasn't done on my own. I certainly had help, and I don't want to discourage in any way anyone who has been through trauma from seeking help from people who know much more about it than any podcaster. This has gone through quite the rabbit hole that I wasn't expecting it to or planning for it to. But I hope that this episode has been beneficial for you. I hope it resonated for you. I hope that it benefited you in some way. I thank you so much for listening. If you are enjoying the podcast, please know we are on Facebook and Instagram as Mosaic in Progress. You can follow us wherever you listen to podcasts. We're on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google, Amazon Music, Audible. If you feel so inclined, please leave us a rating and review. Share it with your friends. And I will hopefully see you on the next podcast as we work together on our Mosaic in Progress.